Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is part of a series I'm doing on Dante's Divine Comedy, wherein I am reading through the entire epic poem, all three books, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, at a rate of 3 cantos or chapters per week. This is an independent contribution to Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project. If you haven't heard of that project, go ahead and click on the link below to that project. It's well worth your time. I highly recommend it. And they're doing the same thing. They're reading through the entire Divine Comedy at a rate of 3 cantos per week. If this is your first time visiting the channel, first of all, welcome. And I'd also invite you to please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We've set the goal of getting up to 200 subscribers by the end of October. At the time of this recording, I believe there's about 173 subscribers, so it's a totally achievable goal with your help, so I thank you in advance for that. A quick note on the organization of these videos. You're going to find a few different parts. You're going to find this introduction, which will be followed by a synopsis, where I'll cover the basic plot and the basic action of the canto under discussion. Then I'll follow that up with a section dedicated to the characters and themes. And after that, I'll offer what I call the takeaway section, wherein I will offer my own personal thoughts on the canto and how the canto may serve to help you live a better life. And then I'll have an outro. And after that, we'll go wherever the YouTube algorithm takes us. All right, so with that, let's get right into it then. Dante's Inferno, Canto 16. We're still in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell. Dante the Pilgrim can hear a nearby waterfall, and it sounds like a giant swarm of bees to him. 3 shades, those of the roaming variety, approach him, and they introduce themselves to him. And his first impression of these 3 shades is their awful injuries, born of the burning embers of this circle of hell. But then, after they introduce themselves, Dante is overcome by a great amount of pity, because he knows exactly who these people are. They're his fellow Florentines, and in fact he knew them in real life. They talk for a bit, and Dante says that he's actually on his way up to heaven, which now that I think about it is quite a rude thing to say to these poor bastards. One of the things that they talk about, that all 4 of them are interested in talking about, is Florence and the state of Florence. And Dante is very sad to report that the state of Florence is quite bad. It's full of decadence and arrogance, and it's enough to make you weep. Dante then once again repeats his pity and the sadness that he feels as a result of having come to understand that his friends are down here suffering the eternal torments of hell. And these stanzas in particular are some of the most moving in the entire poem, at least in my opinion. The shades then take their leave, and Dante the Pilgrim and Virgil his guide move on. They come to a giant cliff, and they look down into it, and Dante cannot fathom the bottom of it. It's all this misty, dense, thick fog. Dante has this cord around his waist, and some scholars claim that this is a Franciscan cord because Dante at one point was a Franciscan monk, or at least an initiate into that order. But for our purposes, all you're going to need to know is that Virgil asks for this cord. And he does so because what he wants to do is throw it off the cliff in order to summon some foul beast. And this rough beast, its hour come round at last, rushes up from the bottom of the cliff, but the canto ends before we can get a good look at it. Talk about a cliffhanger. In our last video, we considered the idea that there was a deeper meaning to Canto 15 other than the traditionally accepted idea that the sin being punished is the sin of sodomy. And since we're in the same region of hell today, it makes sense to explore this idea further and to test to see if it remains true in Canto 16. So that will be the topic of today's characters and themes section, but I want to follow it up with a few quick words on the closing stanzas of this poem, which are, in my opinion, among the most powerful, the most beautiful, and the most haunting images in the entire poem. In our last video, we made the argument that at a deeper level, the sin of violence against nature that's being punished in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell is not so much sodomy as it is the sinner's attempt to earn eternal life through earthly fame rather than a sincere belief in our Lord Jesus Christ. The argument, put simply, is this. The act of sodomy is insufficient to create life and is therefore, at least according to the Catholic Church's teachings, a sin of violence against nature. Likewise, attempts to gain earthly fame are insufficient to attain eternal life. Only a belief in Jesus Christ and the Christian faith can do that, and so that this too is also a sin of violence against nature. For a deeper discussion, please consider watching my previous video. In sum, just as there was a deeper sin being punished in Canto 5 with Francesca and her lover Paolo, maybe too there's a deeper sin being punished in Canto 15, the previous canto, and today's canto, Canto 16, down here in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell. Now, before we move on, I just want to reiterate that even though I'm making this argument, and I believe that it's a good one, that I still believe in the historically accepted understanding of this canto, that it is sodomy that is being punished down here as a sin against nature. After all, who am I to argue against centuries of tradition? With that said, however, let's go ahead and take a deeper look at Canto 16 to see if our argument holds. Is there any evidence that the characters in this canto believe that earthly fame leads to eternal life? Yes, this canto is full of such claims. So, from under the bitter fire rain, three characters rush to Dante because they recognize him by his dress as a fellow Florentine, and one of these three introduces himself to Dante. This man's name is Jacopo Rusticucci. The very first thing that Rusticucci says to Dante is that their fame, he and his two friends, is so great that it requires Dante to tell them who he is and what he's doing down here. Fame. Then Rusticucci goes on to introduce himself and his two friends. And what's the first thing he says about his first friend? Well, he tells Dante that his first friend was of higher rank than you could ever imagine. Fame again. Moving on to the next friend, Rusticucci says that this man's voice deserved a better reception. Now, what could possibly be the reason for this? Well, I'm going to go on a limb and claim that it had something to do with earthly fame. Finally, Rusticucci introduces himself to Dante, and he doesn't say anything about fame here. He just says something about his wife, which we're going to get into later. But for now, just remember that when Rusticucci first approaches Dante, the thing that he has to say to Dante is something about the importance of fame and how fame, entitles people to something. Now, what is Dante the Pilgrim's reaction to seeing his friends again? Well, he speaks immediately of their fame. He says that he has heard their names before. In fact, their names resound in honor all throughout Florence. So again, just like in the last canto, we have this preoccupation in this canto with the topic of fame. What has all this earthly fame got these men? Has it attained for them eternal life? No, it's attained for them only eternal damnation. You'll also notice that again, just like in Canto 15, there's not really any talk at all of sodomy, ostensibly the sin of violence against nature that's being punished in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell. There is maybe some talk of sodomy. Rusticucci speaks about how his bestial wife brought him to this pass, but I read this as just meaning that the lady enjoys butt sex. Or perhaps she denied him sexual access, so he sought consolation in the arms of a male lover. So there's that, and then there's the sin-strewn sinews of Rusticucci's friend. And these are really the only two things in the entire canto that can even possibly be related to the sin of sodomy. And again, this is all opaque. It's not explicit, just like it was in Canto 15. In summation, I think that we could reasonably argue that the true sin being punished in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell is the sin of striving for eternal fame in an effort to attain eternal life, and that this is the true sin of violence against nature. Oh, and providing the perfect punctuation mark to this argument, the three of them then ask Dante to remember them to the people back on Earth. Fame. So now let's turn to those wonderful concluding stanzas of today's canto. Just beautiful. I love them. Most of what follows is going to be directly lifted from that Georgetown EDX course that I spoke about in a previous video. I'm going to leave a link to that course down in the show notes, so be sure to check it out if you have the time. It's highly, highly recommended. The reason I'm borrowing so liberally from that course is because, in my opinion, they absolutely nail it when it comes to this canto, specifically these concluding stanzas. Fun fact, I've been drawing from the notes I took on that course, among other sources, in preparation for this video. And the notes that I took on this particular canto in the course are much longer than any of the other cantos. So even back then, it was clear that I really loved this canto and these concluding stanzas. Anyway, here's what I'd like to share about the concluding stanzas of Canto 16. I'm sure everyone remembers Filippo Argentini and how he served as a kind of transitional character in front of the gates to the city of Dis, where we move from the sins of incontinence to the sins of violence. Well, we're about to leave the sins of violence for the sins of fraud. So, because we're at another transitory period, it makes sense to introduce a new character like Filippo Argentini who can help us with that transition down to the lower level. We're going to meet this character in the next canto. We just catch menacing glimpses of him in this canto as he rushes up from the depths below. And all I'm going to say about this character is that he's another mythical creature, and I think that this is meant to symbolize the inhumanity of the sins that we're about to encounter in the region of the sins of fraud. What Dante does to set us up for this transition is truly sublime in the classical sense of that word. Unknowingly, of course, and anachronistically, Dante combines two of my favorite pieces of art in order to help guide us down into the further regions of hell. And those two pieces of art are Christian existentialism and 1980s teen horror cinema. I know, just bear with me. First, the Christian existentialism. What am I talking about? Well, where are we? We're looking down into an abyss, a deep, mysteriously terrifying abyss. If you're not already thinking about Søren Kierkegaard, then you really need to be. Kierkegaard, of course, used the metaphor of faith being a leap into the unknown, a leap into the abyss. His famous notion of the leap of faith. Dante the poet is doing something similar here. He's presenting the transition to the next level of sin, the most egregious of all the sins of fraud, by having Dante leap down into this horrifying heart of darkness. Yes, this truly is the heart of darkness. Dante the poet describes the abyss as full of dense and murky air. There can be no doubt that this is exactly what Joel Schumacher had in mind when he made that classic scene from The Lost Boys. You know what scene I'm talking about. It's the climatic scene of that great sequence wherein David Powers invites Michael Emerson out to engage in a night of naughty behavior. They go out on their motorcycles, they're terrorizing the town, and all of this culminates with the whole group of vampires plus Michael Emerson hanging from the train tracks over that infinite gulf that is filled with fog. And one by one, they plunge down into a life of sin. And again, they're plunging down through thick, misty fog. Sound familiar? In all cases, Kierkegaard, Michael Emerson, Dante, they all have to choose to make a leap into an unknowable region. It's a choice that all people of faith must make. That unreasonable decision to jump into the abyss, into that unknowable realm beyond all logic. The question is, are we jumping with Kierkegaard and Dante into an abyss of faith? Or are we, like Michael Emerson, jumping into an abyss of sin? In this takeaway, we'll be continuing with our discussion of Seneca's De Ira, the quintessential treatise on anger and how to tame it. And for new viewers, the reason we're doing this is because right now in Dante's Inferno, we're in that region of hell where the sins of violence are being punished. And for Dante, violence is always undergirded by the vice of anger. And so it makes sense that in order to stop ourselves from falling into the sin of violence, we must first curb our anger. We're going to be discussing Book 3 of De Ira today, and Seneca's objective in Book 3 of De Ira is to find ways to banish anger from one's mind. He writes about how different people will find different ways to address this issue, and each of them will play to their relative strengths. There is one practice, however, that Seneca believes can be employed by everyone, regardless of who they are. And that is, what you want to do is you want to interrogate anger. You want to make its awful yield well known and apparent to you. He writes, "We shall forestall the possibility of anger if we repeatedly set before ourselves its many faults, and shall rightly appraise it. Before our own hearts we must arraign and convict it. We must search out its evils and drag them into the open, in order that it may be shown as it really is. It should be compared with all that is the worst." This makes sense to me. I mean, after all, if we regularly remind ourselves how awful anger is, then we're less likely to allow ourselves to fall into the trap of anger in the first place. Seneca also counsels us to find people that are worthy of spending time with. Birds of a feather flock together. He says to hang out with people that don't risk plunging you down into the depths of anger. We should live with a very calm and good-natured person, one that is never worried or captious. We adopt our habits from those with whom we associate, and as certain diseases of the body are spread to others from contact, so the mind transmits its fault to those nearby. And if all that doesn't work, Seneca has one last piece of advice, and it's the one that I think is the most important. And what he says to do is once you feel that awful pang of anger swelling within you, He wants you to calm down and he wants you to wait. He wants you to wait a little bit before reacting to that anger. Fight against yourself. If you will to conquer anger, it cannot conquer you. If it is kept out of sight, if it is given no outlet, you begin to conquer. Let us conceal its signs, and so far as it is possible, let us keep it hidden and secret. All right, that concludes my video for Canto 16 of Dante's Inferno. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It would really help me out. We've set the goal of getting up to 200 subscribers by the end of October. It's a totally achievable goal. At the time of this recording, we're at 173 subscribers. So with your help, thank you very much. I'm pretty sure we can get there. More important than likes and subscriptions, however, is getting a conversation going. And that's what I want to do down in the comments below. So please take this time to leave a comment down there about either the poem in general, this canto in particular, or the video that I made and my opinions in it. I'm really interested in getting to know what you think and getting to know you. Other than leaving comments, you can always contact me on Twitter at Brian E. Denton. Remember that these videos are going to be released every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The Monday videos are going to be released in the evenings, but the Wednesday and the Friday videos are going to be released in the early mornings. The next video is going to be released on Friday morning. So until then, take care of yourselves and others.
How long your video's gonna stop?
1 more hour.
Oh, okay.